Okay, week 7. Lesson 4? Today is going to be part 2 of what true spiritual fruit looks like. And the next 3 in the list that we're going to talk about are the fruit of the Spirit that'll round out what a growing follower of Jesus looks like. This one's going to be a bit longer than the other ones. These particular 3 seem to grow in their weight, or their maybe just the explanation of them does, because we want to get the explanation right. And the first one in this last list of 3 is a doozy, and it's patience. There are only a few things on this whole earth that try my patience more than long lines at Walmart and congested traffic, especially on South Tyler. It's extremely easy for me to fall into my flesh and into sin, and respond too fast, too quickly, in anger and frustration. I was born with what my high school coach used to call a high-strung personality. I've had a short fuse as a young man. And it's been a struggle my entire life to keep that dragon in the cave, as it were. But in Exodus 34:6, it describes God himself, though, as slow to anger. In contrast, Proverbs 15:18 describes this hot-tempered man stirring up strife. And then to oppose that, in 2 Peter 3:9, we have a great example of what patience looks like, as it speaks of how God himself isn't slow or slack about his promises, but it says he is patiently standing by, wishing that none would perish. This godly patience that's born from the Holy Spirit, it doesn't explode in anger. It doesn't explode in judgment. But instead, this patience participates with God in righteousness and in mercy. This is where we extend a spirit of forgiveness, that spirit of support. But instead, a lot of times in our current culture of outrage, I like to call it, even followers of Jesus get caught up in this whirlwind of unhealthy and unrighteous displays of sinful anger and frustration. But it's the duty of the follower of Jesus to temper our inherently fleshly responses and bathe them in the patient presence of the Holy Spirit. Boy, that sounded like a motto. But that's what we're called to do. It's the fruit of the Spirit. These next 2 come together. There's kindness and goodness. And the fruits of kindness and goodness are really similar, but they're also distinct from one another. The Greek translators of the Old Testament used both of these words as root words to communicate this, how do I say it? It's a Hebrew idea of what's called tov, T-O-V. And it's a multifaceted, beautiful word that carries with it this meaning of good, pleasant, and morally right. The Greek word that specifically is used for kindness, though, is a bit more narrow than the one used for goodness. And it's implying this active goodness, primarily kindness towards other people. And like love that we just talked about in a couple lessons ago, the word for kindness is a word of action. It is a word of action towards others, and it's an outward thing. We see this in Ephesians chapter 2, verse 4 through 7. And it's a prime example of kindness, because that's when Jesus offered life to doomed humanity by his own sacrificial death and subsequently his glorious resurrection. But he leaves for us in that moment the supreme command, not just the example of kindness. And we read about that in Luke 6, verse 35. It says there that he's called us to even be good to our enemies, to be actively, outwardly kind to them, because that's what he did. Jesus was kind to some very evil and very ungrateful people. And that's the kind of heart that he's calling us to have. And this is the sort of fruit that can only come, from the Holy Spirit. It can only come from the filling of the Holy Spirit, not just from ourselves. And that's what we have to remember. And in a little bit of a contrast to the narrow, others-focused actions of kindness, goodness is more about us acting and believing and thinking in a way that's morally right and good. This is us reflecting the ways of God. According to Mark 10, verse 18, he's the only one who's truly good. And so what we're doing through the Holy Spirit is just reflecting that and showing out what he is in this world. We see this idea of goodness in the Hebrew word tov that we just talked about in Genesis. And it's used in that creation story when God created the earth and he created all that was in it. And he says repeatedly in chapter 1 that he saw that everything he made, and then he saw that it was good. It was in a state of tov, goodness. And the concept and the idea of the fruit of goodness of the Holy Spirit stems from and comes out of this original, eternal goodness of God. This is that same goodness that he created all the things in the beginning. And in fact, in Genesis 1:31, after he'd created humans and put them over in the garden, he said it was tov meod, or very good. It wasn't just good, it was really good. And as you and I are filled with the Holy Spirit, and we begin to produce this fruit of the Holy Spirit, our job is to work at injecting this goodness, this moral action, this moral thinking into the world around us as we go, as we do the things around us that we do through the day. This morality and purity, they're not things that we just muster, up from our own abilities or our own goodness that we think we're born with, but they're an outflow of the presence of the Holy Spirit. Now, the flip side of this is when we are filled with impurity, immorality, or a lack of goodness, or there's a lack of goodness present in our lives. It could be an indicator that the Holy Spirit is not present in our lives. I mean, we're not moral because we're awesome. We're kind and we're good because the Holy Spirit's flowing out of our thoughts, out of our feelings, and our actions. And then right on the heels of kindness and goodness comes this other very familiar trait, that of faithfulness. And I have found linguistically sometimes the easiest way to explain something to someone is to use synonyms, similes and metaphors, or some other word that means close to the same thing so we can describe it. But faithfulness in the Scriptures is like fidelity, commitment, reliability, trustworthiness. Having faith and showing faithfulness is more than just merely knowing about or agreeing with God or the Scriptures on a given matter. According to James chapter 2, verse 19, he reminds us that even the demons know Jesus. So they knew Jesus, they still do, and they believed. And like kindness and love, faithfulness is a word of action. So we've got to take it beyond the belief and into doing the things that come out of these ways of thinking. God is seen all over His Word as a very steady and trustworthy person, as an entity. But He's not random. He's not unstable. Unlike us, He doesn't fluctuate in His sensibilities. He doesn't fly off the handle. Even with Jesus, when He scourged the temple and cleaned the temple out, He wasn't. That wasn't a rage of passion. It was calculated. I mean, He went back and made the cat o' nine tails. It was not something that He did rashly on the fly, because God's not ruled by His passions in the moment like we are. We see that lived out so well and so often in the person of Jesus. Because He knew the truth of His Father, the truth of eternity, guided everything that He did. Not His whims, not His whimsy. Even in the garden before the crucifixion, we have this chilling, awesome example of what faithfulness looks like. Previous verses would say that there was a time when Jesus turned His face towards the cross. He was focused on it. Over Luke 22, we see this story of Jesus in the garden, and He expresses this very real, very human desire to not only avoid the suffering of death and the physical pain, but I often wonder if more so than that, He wished to avoid this separation, this relationship scar that was about to come between Him and the Father that He'd never experienced before. He was perplexed and burdened and weighed down in His emotions and in His mind, but it was His faithfulness that led Him to verse 42 to submit to the will of the Father. It was His faithfulness that helped Him to take the step, redeem mankind, no matter what it cost. And that's exactly what He did. In these previous lessons, we've talked about what it looks like to die to self, to live, to walk, and act on behalf of others. And we've talked about faith and dependence on God, and answering the call to follow Jesus is just a lot more than a mental or intellectual assent to His teachings. It's embracing that His way of life, this life of faithfulness and love and joy and peace, embracing this life of His will and His direction from God. It's embracing complete dependence on Him, no matter what's coming, all the while being inspired and empowered by the Holy Spirit. And that's the only way that we could ever actually remain faithful in this life or the next. We've got to have the Spirit's power. And the next